Okay, as I've started to discover, as soon as I hit that start streaming button, it's going. Well, welcome to this week's show of the Photoshop show. And this week we're going to dive right into talking about techniques that use the LAB mode of editing color. Okay? LAB stands for luminescence, A channel, and B channel. And luminescence is just the black and white content of the image, and whereas the A channel contains the green and magenta color. If you know about color, you know that if you have less green, you've got more magenta, basically, because the two are mutually exclusive. They're opposite colors. And the same with blue and yellow, and that's the B channel. I always remember that the B channel is the blue and yellow one because it starts with a B. So does blue. So same kind of a thing. The blue and yellow and the those channels, they're mutually exclusive because they're opposites. So our eye sees things in a very, very similar way, analogous to how LAB, how the A and B channels work, well, and the L channel. We have the rods that see the luminescence and pick up the color, the lightness intensity, the brightness, and so do the cones, but the cones also pick up these differences between the magenta and green and the blue and yellow, and they compare this in order to, by comparing this in our brain, they make up all the different colors of the rainbow. So it's interesting that something being not something becomes something, becomes a color. By having less stimulus of one direction becomes the stimulus of the other direction. It's complicated. But anyway, Photoshop's internal workings for color all use this LAB mode in actuality. And even though we have the RGB mode, which was familiar with monitors and digital cameras and all that, all work in RGB color. And we have the CMYK color mode that works for printing with cyan, magenta, yellow, and the black for the black ink separated out to save ink on making things darker, control the grays through a dedicated black channel. Those are different. Those are all derived from the LAB internally, and all the actual mathematics and number crunching is done by the computer in the LAB mode. So we're getting right down to the basics of how this software works. So that's kind of cool, huh? Well, let's go ahead and jump right into Photoshop. I've got a bunch of different images open. First, I think I'll show some images I've already changed and give you some indication. If you're watching on a good monitor with 1080p, definitely enlarge this to fill your screen and change your monitor to change the video to 1080p, as I am streaming at that speed. It's a new experiment. We're trying to hold up with my internet connection, see if my upload will hold up and not drop too many frames. If you see me suddenly freeze up and a sentence or portion of a sentence disappears, that's what's going on, is that I'm just pushing my Time Warner connection a bit hard. But this time of night has been proving to be okay. The evenings are okay. For those who are trying to upload yourself a live stream, the evenings seem to be a lot better than late at night when all of the online gamers get on. And after 2:30, good grief, I can't get it do anything. Anyway, let's turn off this camera and get right to Photoshop. Okay, so here we are. Let's move this picture here to the front. And this was a difficult picture to work with, and it's very subtle, the amount of difference. But I'm going to just show you what I did. Now it's off, and you see it's kind of lacking in contrast overall. All I did when I turned this on is I increased color contrast and nothing else. So let's double click the curves control and bring it up. As you can see, it looks like a normal curves control. And I can increase the contrast by making this steeper, just like you do in RGB when you're adjusting the contrast for an image. So I can make it more interesting in terms of the contrast by making this steeper. But that's not what this program is about. We're talking about something different. We're talking about color contrast. And so let's go ahead and look at the A channel first. And as you can see, I made this steeper by quite a bit. And if you're wondering how I got these small squares, if you hold down your Alt key and click on that, it will change the number of squares, okay, to be 10. And I like working with that. It's a little finer grain, but you don't have to do it the way I do it. And as you see, I did not make these equal. And because they weren't equal, I had to pin this center in the middle, because otherwise any deviation of this middle part from center changes the color. It's great for removing color casts. And I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to move this way, and you see what happens? I'm affecting my my colors quite a bit in there. This is, so as you can tell, this direction is the magenta direction. This direction is the green direction. Okay, so I'm changing. Center is not changing and doing any color correction at all. Okay, so if I have it in the center, I'm not doing color correction. One thing a lot of people don't know is you can click on a dot and then use your arrow keys to nudge it. Okay, so once you place an anchor onto the path, you can move it with your arrow keys rather than having to use the mouse. And that's kind of handy sometimes, especially when you're trying to get that dot right precise where you want it. Okay, so I increased the color contrast a bit here, and I also increased it a bit on the B with the yellow and blue. Not very much, as you can see. Now let's see what happens if I do increase it on this. Look at what happens down here with the yellow down here. See how I'm intensifying it? So it looks almost like a hue saturation type of thing, except I'm selectively increasing saturation of the yellows. Well, in a sense, that's true. I'm increasing the amount of yellow that's present in the picture by moving this that way. So obviously this direction is yellows, and this direction is blue. Okay. Now this makes this tool great for removing that blue cast that can happen in daylight photos, in that you can move towards the yellow, and that knocks out some of the blue. Okay, and let's go ahead and make this a little more contrast. I was being kind of conservative, and I've made it a little more yellow, and I'm trying to knock out some of the blue cast of the haze in the background. Now mind you, I could be working on a mask, through a mask, and just work on the background back here if I was trying to remove all that blue haze. And I feel like I've made that yellow a little bit too intense maybe. So now this is the bright up here. This is the bright yellows. Okay, so you can turn it down. See how it works really quite differently from a luminosity curve. So up here I'm working on the brighter portions of the yellows. Down here I'm working on darker yellows. Okay, so and moving these towards each other with the thing pinned in the middle, I'm increasing the contrast between the yellow and the magenta. So it's similar to the luminosity curve, in that the steeper the line, the higher the amount of contrast. And what this means in this case is that I'm making the saturation of the magenta and the greens more intense, so that they have more contrast. So you see what I'm saying? By turning up both simultaneously, I'm increasing their contrast equally. All right, by increasing both of their saturation independent of the blue and yellow. So I'm increasing contrast, but only of the green and magenta. However, if I only move one, then I'm increasing contrast by increasing the saturation of one and not the other. And if I'm making too much color cast, you see, I might want to be doing it that way. So So again, this is getting crazy steep here. And here we are. And I'm going to kind of keep pulling this back a little bit. Here we go. I don't want that yellow quite as intense. And I got quite a bit in here, and I probably pulled back a little bit too much, but that's looking good. So as you can see, I've gotten rid of a lot of that blue cast. I still would sort of like to get rid of even more, but well, I don't know. I think I'm doing okay right here. All right, and going into the red, let's say I want more, I want these greens to come out more. So which greens are they? There we go. So as we saw, this direction is magenta, this direction is green. Okay, so I still don't want to actually change the color difference, but I want to increase the contrast. And so I can do that by various maneuvers in here. Okay, so down here is my green contrast. And it's increasing both. Just kind of move this. And there we go. Okay, so now we're at a point where I would feel okay in saying I've got enough contrast in here in the colors, and now I can go in and fool around with my luminosity. Okay, my lightness. And so now that I got that, I can bring in the lightness channel and start messing around with luminosity contrast to bring out the rest of the picture. All right, so there's an example of messing around here. Now, needless to say, this doesn't have to be pinned in the middle, because this is just your regular old black and white contrast. If you were just to look at this channel alone, which I'll do for you, let's go into the channels, and I'll turn off these others. Oh, stop that. There we go. Okay, so as you see, the lightness channel is just the black and white content. In fact, you can come in here with the curves while you're just looking at the lightness channel and be messing around with it in the curves. Now, of course, I was looking at the wrong thing, so let's look at the correct lightness channel. There we go. I wondered why that wasn't working. All right, and then go to my curves. Let's turn the rest of these on. All right, good. And I have a little, there's always a built-in mask, by the way. Whenever you use one of these adjustment layers like I've got here, there's always a built-in mask that you can paint with, I usually use gray, or you can use black at a reduced intensity, opacity, and you can paint in. So if you've done too much in an area, you can paint in some changes. And I'll show you right now what I mean. It's hit the B key for the brush, and as you see, I've got normal. I'll turn down my opacity because I don't want to completely wipe it out, and I'll hit the right bracket key to make my brush bigger. There we go. And I'll just paint with gray in here. There we go. And so now I've lessened the effect in here. And I'll just let you see what the mask looks like by itself. And as you see, that's all I did. And the subsequent paintings of the color make the gray darker, and so that lessens the effect of the tool, of the adjustment layer. Okay, that is true with all of these adjustment layers that are inside of here. Of course, you can do this on any layer. You can add a mask by clicking on the mask thing, as we covered in the last couple of weeks. You can add a layer mask. So that way you could make a copy of a channel that you've been working on, add a mask, and mix it in. You'll see me doing that with some others, with some other examples that I have in here, where I created copies of the affected thing, it did some more manipulation, or added it in multiply or overlay mode and lowered the opacity quite a bit. So all right, this is a difficult picture to start with, but we've got quite a bit more color coming through here. It has a more depth, and it was a morning shot. It was not a lot of light, but let's go ahead and hold Alt down and hit the eyeball. And there's the before. So as you see, it had quite a bluish cast to it. There was hardly any color to the greenery in front, and the back is very bluish, and you can't really see any much color contrast in the background. But you bring in what I've made these changes, and you see that now we see quite a bit more color contrast in the back. You see I've removed much of the blue cast and given this more interest by increasing the contrast between the colors. Okay, so there's more I could have done with this, more I can do with it, and I have actually. I've done some experimenting with various different techniques and sharpening techniques by messing with the with copies of this. Let's go ahead and close this and save it. Sort of like this better than what I had before. Okay, here's another example. This was an image, and here I'll turn off the curve. As you see, it's a bit washed out. It's a really nice image, quite dramatic, but things got kind of washed out. By bringing in the curve, I was able to bring out much of this. And notice I haven't done a thing to the contrast. The brightness contrast, or the black and white contrast, is not even touched in this case. This is all the A channel, which I made moderately steep, very hardly even touched it because it was overblasting on these reds if I did too much. And I just lightly touched the B channel as well. And I did them at slightly different settings, where I moved this quite a bit further in than I did this one. Okay, and that brought out the yellows in here, and yet still fought back the blue cast that was in here. And so again, we'll do it before. You see there's quite a blue cast, not a lot of color contrast, and then that's some blue cast removed. You see the richness of the yellow grasses in the foreground. Now, of course, I could do even more with this. Like I say, I didn't even do anything with the contrast in here. Remember, the way contrast works is the steeper the line, the more contrast you have, and the more it is appealing to the eye. But you don't have to move it like this. You can leave these pinned. If I move this top one, I'm pushing the clouds kind of hard. Okay, so they're starting to wipe them out. But that doesn't stop me from pushing up here in the upper area, or creating what they call S-curve, and just adding contrast to the midtones. So this is the middle grays, okay, the mid grays. This is your high bright grays. This is your dark grays down here. So you can leave the dark grays and all that alone. You don't have to make them darker. Moving this way makes the dark grays darker. And you needn't even touch that. You can simply fool around with the middle grays by making a slight S shape and making the shape smoother. Another thing a lot of people don't know is if you're in the curves control and you click on the image content, it shows you with a little bouncing ball. I hope you can see that. There's a little ball bounces around and shows you where you are in terms of the brightness level, the luminosity level. So it looks to me like I've kind of pushed this a little too hard, kind of blown it out a bit. So I'm going to pull that down and push up instead up here, if I'm to make my my steepness, because I thought I just kind of made that a little bit too steep. There we go. Sometimes you have to throw a bunch of dots in and have more control over things. So what I've done is I've made more interest in this. See, the steepest part is in this high bright area and in here. So I've made this have more interest. Now say I wanted to work on these mountains and make them be the interest point. I could hunt around and try to find out where that primary area is, and it is sort of in that zone. There's not much information in there, but again, I could make that steeper. But that's probably too steep. So let's bring it back. By bringing it back a bit, I keep from blowing out the whites, and I keep some of the subtle grays in there. But sometimes you can really get in there, and you can zoom in, and you can bring out details that you thought were completely lost. Also, don't forget you can work through a mask and use the tools like in the adjustments. You can use the tools like shadow highlight and things like that if you're in RGB, but those don't work. Those aren't available to you in LAB mode. Okay, so now we discussed a couple of things. Let me see what's available to you in LAB. Yeah, so you see they gray out the ones that aren't available to you in LAB. Oh, shadow highlight is available to you in LAB. I'd forgotten that. So you have brightness contrast, which I don't recommend you ever using. The curves control is the main reason why you would ever want to be in here. Replace color works very efficiently though in LAB because it's all about the colors. Okay, so I feel like I've left you with enough information, but there you go. There's a improvement on that picture. Okay, and again, these were nice pictures to begin with, but they just had contrast problems and suffered from the issues that the sky brings into everything. Okay, now we're going to discuss some contrast issues where we're in things that don't have a whole lot of color range. And so how would you make color contrast where there isn't, where you have a lot of magenta in here, obviously, and you have a lot of yellow, but you don't really have blue and you don't really have green existing in here. So how do I make color contrast? Well, you have to work on 2 channels, but it's doable. You can make more contrast happen between these. And simple, you get the idea. It's sort of like saturation, but it works a lot more efficiently. But now you're going to get to see how we do it from scratch. So we go to Image, Mode, and here we are. Normal, you start up in RGB, and you change it to LAB color. Mind you, I'd already done that with those others, and I'd saved in LAB. Okay, so now I have all of these different tools at my disposal. So we're going to leave the lightness control alone for now. And we'll go into the A, and I'm going to pin the middle. Okay, so that I don't want to change any colors right here. And I'll just go right ahead into B, and I'll do the same thing. I'll pin the color. And so first thing I might want to do is just go ahead and experiment a little bit. Now that I've pinned it, let's see what happens. Oh, look at that. Oh, it makes it very yellow. Aha. Or I can pull back on some things. Look at that. All right. Oh, that's interesting. It's becoming, yes, more. Look at that. Okay. Let's do this one. It makes that, oh, look at that. Strength. Okay. And So you might say, okay, so what you going to do? What you going to do? Well, let's see. What will I do? The thing I'm going to do is I'm going to keep a handle on that. I'm going to increase this a bit. And this is the just remove a little bit of blue cast. Oh, we're in the wrong direction. There we go. Okay, taking out some of the blue because there was some blue cast in that. There we go. And I don't know, should I make... Okay. Let's see a before and after. Yeah, so I'm adding a little bit of yellow to this on purpose. Now let's go ahead and get some magenta happening. And this is pinned. Now again, magenta's this way, green's that way. Okay. So what shall I do? I think I'll do something along these lines. Whoa, this reaction's a little slow. My reaction's a little slow. Okay, I feel like I've overkilled there a bit. Yeah, that's nice. All right, let's do a preview. Look at that. That's color contrast, and only color contrast has brought out the richness of these color subtleties. just by making the line a little bit steeper. So so what's happening is that similar to how making the line steeper increases contrast and brings out the difference in the grays by making the gradients move faster by you're kind of tightening up on the shape of the gradient, or you might say on the gamma of the whole thing. Similarly, I'm doing that to color in here by making the changes more rapid, by making this steeper. And so it's bringing out the subtlety between this lighter color stone and this darker color red stone, so that it's more obvious, and it takes out that haze, that kind of color haze. I haven't done a thing with luminosity here at all, and unlike RGB, where any changes to luminosity also affects saturation, here I'm working completely independently of luminosity. I am just working on the saturation component, the color component of the image, and messing around in there. So I still feel like there's a little bit of a blue cast. I'm going to remove that a little bit more. And that feels better to me now. Oh, what about there? Okay, so there we have a difference that was just done with color and nothing but color, bringing out the subtleties and richness of differences. So you're seeing in here, inside here, you're seeing that deeper red is now brought out. That barely appeared. It just looks like practically gray. It doesn't look like a difference between the red ceiling and this red kind of sediment, whereas here it's clearly evident. And mind you, if I ever feel like I've overdone it, and I'm a big fan of overdoing it, I always say overdo it, because you can always come in with the opacity on the layer and you can pull it back and bring back the amount of change that you did. Okay, so don't be afraid to go ahead and overdo it a little bit and then tweak the opacity later on. And there we go. I think that's more subtle. And again, I still haven't done a thing with oops, you have to, in this you have to double click on the actual little circle. I forget how it works in the newer versions. I haven't done a thing with the contrast here. I haven't lightened it, I haven't steepened the mids, I haven't done a thing. So I still have that opportunity. Plus, one thing I often like to do, cancel, is I often like to go ahead and add a second curves control while if I'm working in LAB. And so now this is a fresh curves control, so there's no curves in it at all. And work on my lightness channel as an independent entity, and mess around with it and fool with the contrast and get in here without touching the A and B in this one, until I feel like I've brought out some component that I really feel like that's the one I'm wanting to focus on. Like I'm wanting to focus on this part right here, for instance. And then I overkill, and then I pull back its opacity, and that way I have independent control over my my luminosity channel curves and my colors. Okay, and you could of course make 3 of these and have separate control over the A, B, and L channels. So, but I've never had to do that or felt a need to do that. Usually, if the color is either right or it's not. Plus, as you're seeing, the A and B channels work together to produce kind of a phantom third channel based on the relationship between the B and the A channels. Okay, so you generally always want to be working on the color, the A and B together, and then you can separate out and make a separate one for the luminosity or lightness channel. Okay. I use luminosity interchangeably with lightness. But you get the idea. It's about the black and white content. All right, so there's one. Let's go ahead and I'll just save that as a. Let's go ahead and save it. Oh, and I want to thank Fred Vaughn for allowing me to share his pictures that he's taken in the desert. He's a wonderful photographer, and he gave me permission to use his pictures for these demos. Okay, here's another one. It presents some challenges, and it just got a little bit blown out here and stuff like that. Let's see how much of this we can fix with just color contrast. So again, we're going to go to mode. In fact, let's go ahead and so over here in actions, I'm going to record an action. Let's make a new action. And in fact, I'll make a new, first of all, I'm going to make a new set. And inside there, I'll make it the little new page icon and call it switch to LAB mode. And all this is going to be, and I'm going to assign a function key. I'm going to make this be Control F10, I guess. All it's going to record is me doing a mode change, nothing else. So I'll go to mode, LAB color, and hit stop. All right, great. So now I can do this quickly in a keystroke. All right, so let's go ahead and bring up the curves. Heck, why not adding a curves thing to it? You wonder, how am I going to re-record this? You just go to the last one and hit the record button again, and then do your thing. Add a curves, and it's done. I'm going to hit OK and push stop. All right, so now next time I do this, I can run this little tool, this little action, and it'll convert the mode and make an curves adjustment layer for me automatically. Save some time, hey? And now you've seen how to do that. All right, so now I have my lightness there, but I'm just going to work in the A channel first. Again, I'm going to pin the middle because I don't think I want to do any color correction in here, although it might actually maybe could use a little bit of green, a little bit of more reddening up, more magenta, but let's just go ahead and leave that for now, not mess with the color, and just increase the color contrast. So I probably should always just overkill for these videos and to always see what overkill looks like. So there's overkill. Okay, so really, and since there's nothing but magenta in this content, there is no green. What I'm doing is I'm just really super saturating the magenta content. So obviously we can't go to that excess, okay, with this. But you can be more subtle with this tool, and you can actually remove saturation by moving up, and that actually lowers the contrast and takes some of the saturation out. If you've got areas that are already oversaturated, and I would just about have to say that this area, this is already pretty oversaturated. So let's go ahead and look in here. This is where I would like to see an improvement, and by clicking with my eyedropper tool, it's showing me the little ball just to the northeast of my center in that area, and it's showing that most of this is in that kind of a level. Looks like that's a key region to be fooling around with. So that's interesting. So let's see what happens if I just move this part around. And I'm going to pin this part so it stops moving. Oh yeah, look at that. Look at that. Okay, so a little subtle change. Okay, so we already have so much darn contrast in here. This thing can hardly even be touched. Let's see what can happen when I do anything with this channel, if anything. Again, doing this direction is going to bring in the yellows, and it's a great way if you've got blue cast, which I feel like I do have some blue cast. Great way to take casts out. And we'll go ahead and make this a little bit steeper in here. I think I've done too much with the yellow cast story. And too much over here too. So this one required much more subtle treatment. I'm kind of surprised how much yellow is actually in this content. Yeah, it's yeah, that's way too blue. Okay. There we are. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is dial in where I've really shown more of the yellow content. As you can see, there's a lot of yellowish magenta in here. And so let's go back to my magenta and maybe mess around a little bit with the steepness of this. And because this is more than I'm going to actually use, but I'm just trying to bring out some of the contrast that's in the color. All right, so there's before, there's after. See, I've really super overkilled with the magenta in this case. Make sure I got the right dot selected. Oh, I'm selecting a bunch of dots here. Get rid of that dot. There we have. Okay. There we go. Okay, so that's definitely overkill. But all right, so I'm showing you how to do the overkill thing because I want you to understand that you can always overkill and then pull back on the opacity. So I've got this change. This may not have been the best example, but yes, now I brought out more of that darker magenta in here, a little bit more of that. It's making that shadow, that dark part a little bit too intense, so I'm going to pull it back. And now I'm going to go ahead and pick this, and I'm going to make another curves, and I'll just mess with the contrast now. This area in here, again, this bright area, I definitely don't want to do anything to. So actually, I'm not going to touch that, and I'm going to try to even pull back and make that a little more subtle. Let's see what I can do in there. Not much. Oh yeah, I'm just making it too dark now. Okay, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. Making matters worse. So I think I'm not going to do anything with the shadows. This is definitely something where the only place I can really mess around is in these dark areas here. So I'll just increase the contrast of these shadows of this area here to bring out the granularity of that subtle region. I'm not even going to do it a whole lot. There we go. I just wanted to bring out the three-dimensionality. And by the way, one way you know that you're getting okay with contrast is always if you're getting it to look more 3D in some area, then you're probably doing good. Plus, you can do multiple lightness channels, and you can use masking so that you're only working on different sections, different ways. This is probably was just blown out to begin with, and there's not much I'll be able to do with it, but we can look at a shadow highlight to see if it's salvageable in any kind of a way. There we go. So yeah, I brought a little bit more of the subtlety in there while still retaining the three-dimensionality that I wanted to get in here. But you always, if you gain contrast one place, you're giving it up somewhere else. Wherever the curve becomes less steep, you are giving up contrast. That's always the battle in doing a curves control in anything that you're doing with contrast. You cannot gain contrast in one place without losing it somewhere else. When you're doing it subtle moves like this, you're always going to wind up losing some, but you can always add more dots and decide exactly where you want to lose that contrast. Just lose the contrast in a section of the picture where there's really no content. Throw that contrast away. So I like to kind of take my eyedropper and float around the image and find out where I really don't have much action. And as you see, I didn't feel like I really had much action in here, so I threw away contrast in here. Some of you might disagree. You might say, you kidding me? That was the most interesting part. And up in here, I tried to increase, without blasting anything, I tried to increase the contrast and get back some detail. But this is a place where the good old shadow highlight control might have been something that I'd want to pull out. For those of you not familiar with shadow highlight, it does a really amazing job of restoring highlight material. It's just a little overkill. So where things are blown out, I've already fixed that section. And in opening up shadows, where the shadows content was too much in the dark, where it was just too dark. Okay, and then you come in and you work with the contrast after this, but you always do this afterwards. Now this is the simple version. You can click on show more options and it shows many more things, and even including a little bit of color correction. And it's nice because that works in LAB if you're in the LAB mode, so it's actually working more directly on the image in very cool ways. But the shadow highlight thing is working pretty much, it's doing its calculations in LAB anyway, most likely, right? Okay, so as you see, so there's before and after shadow highlight. So you see the shadows really got opened up, and I'm really satisfied with that, much more so. And I'm going to take, oh, by the way, always do label your things. Since this was my lightness channel, I can decide, did I really make a difference? Yes, I did. Even with shadow highlight, this lightness made a difference. I'm going to pull back on the intensity though, because what I did with shadow highlight took out some of the need for some of the changes. So I just dropped it down to 65%. I like what it did with the color, is that it made some of the color subtleties richer. Some of you may disagree and say, you didn't need to do that, but nonetheless, this is all about us learning how to make these things, this tool, work. Okay, so let's blast through a couple more, and just close that out. Okay, here's another good, and by the way, the Photoshop Lab color book is called the Canyon Conundrum by Dan Margulis, because of many of the things that he points out. Canyon types of shots and western shots of very rocky areas, anything that's rocky, really works great for this this whole technique. Okay, all right, so I'm just going to play this thing, and bingo, I'm in lab mode, and now I've got my my tool up here. So let's go ahead and see what happens with the well, there, I've reddened everything, and I'm going to make this really steep, really steep, crazy steep. Well, that's too steep. Okay, not really steep. Take that back. Now, I did that because I wanted to bring out how much you can do with the greens, okay? Now, mind you, I can then move this around and drop out some of the color casting, but I wanted to make the difference between the green and the magenta be very strong. So that's why you're talking about this kind of a thing. And let's see, what was it again? No, it's not what I'm thinking of. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead, and it's so overkill, it's unbelievable. That's actually kind of interesting. All right, so let's do a before and after. Okay, so there's before and after, and you see I've made this greenery much more green, and it'd be nice to see if I can make the greenery greener. By the way, this is again losing color contrast, gaining color contrast. I have to pull this back again. I don't want this to be too steep. I just want to show off what can be done on just this side of things. Now you can do quite a bit. I can do things like this, and see, I can reduce the contrast. Remember, you're losing contrast the more horizontal a line is. The actual area that you're seeing this control effect is only about actually in this area that I'm making a circle around. when you're getting into these areas down here, you're talking so dark the eye can't see it, and so light the eye can't see it. You're talking about luminosities of sunlight level, of the center of the sun. The LAB control is very extreme in the amount of the range of the numbers it applies for luminosity. So you're really only having an effect in this little area, and the closer you are to this thing, this center line, the closer you are to 50-50 gray. Okay, above 50-50 gray this way, below 50-50 gray that way. So that's why you can make changes like this, and they affect the color contrast only in a certain range. Okay, so I can pull this back and oops, want that to stay there. And now I've made, as you can see, I've got these greens glowing because I made this so steep right in here. The greens are glowing, but the reds are not going crazy. Okay, so again, the only range you're actually having an effect on is this little range in here as far as visible luminosities that our eye can look at. Below that, you're getting such dark shadow material that it's too dark for the eye to even discern, and you get above and you're talking about luminosities that are like looking at the sun. Okay, but obviously this is way more contrast than we want, but this is how you kind of dial in and mess around with the steepness on an independent level. Okay, so let's go ahead, and I'm going to use my arrow keys, and I'll overkill on the greenery, and in fact I'll overkill on both. I'll go ahead and make this steep. Not that. Okay, about there. And then just being mindful that I'm going to be pulling back later on. So that's just the A channel. And here's the before and the after. You may be saying, oh, it looks fine before. Well, but the greenery wasn't showing up enough. And so that's what I really wanted to bring out. In fact, I really did overdo it on the on that. So there you go. So now I got just the greenery being emphasized. You see? Doing a little bit too much on my blues up here. Let's find out. Let's get rid of that. Okay, so now I'm going to, there's really no blue cast on here, but again, put a pin in here and make it steep to make it more difference between yellow and blue. And yet I can then pull back, and if I can even reduce. And you see now I'm getting what color? I'm getting purple. See? Yes. So that's where purple comes from. Yes. And I think I'd sort of like to pull back. Now this is, you know, so I'm making this blue less intense. Just, there we go. Pulling it back a bit. A little more azure. And increasing the yellow just a smidge. Well, I'll increase it a lot. Okay. Alright, so there we go. So there's my before and my after. And as you can see, I've brought out a lot more of the color subtleties that are happening inside of here without even touching anything in the contrast, in the luminosity contrast. So now I'll come in knowing that I've overkilled, and I'll pull back the effect so it's not as intense. So there's with nothing, and just kind of add a touch, and there we go. Now I think I've added a nice bit of color to this. I'm at 50% of what my effect was. So again, I was making my effect to be really powerful, and those that like that Technicolor look might like to keep it in full blown, but I'm going to pull that back to about 50% of what it was, a little bit more. And so now my before, there's my before and my after. And so before and after. So I got a richer sky, I've got better greens, I got more color subtlety going on. And once more, if I wanted to affect the contrast now, and mess around with contrast, I could. But you see, there's already so many contrast challenges. There's a lot of contrast in here with things being in deep shadow and whatnot. It might be too dangerous to mess around too much with contrast. I am seeing a little bit of a blue cast that's affecting the huts, the carved houses that are underneath here in shadow. So that's something that I can go ahead and affect right here, or I could have made another layer and decided that I was going to get rid of blue casts in a separate layer, but I'll do it right there. Okay, so what that actually does is it undoes some of that contrast in there. I'll just go ahead here and make that steep again, while still eliminating the blue cast. There we are. Alright, so that's a little bit better. Okay, so there's that one. Before and coming up after, there and after. So not a huge move, but nice effect. What the heck? I'm gonna go for a little more Technicolor. There we go. All right, so let's save this. I probably would pull back that sky some more. Now, once you get some settings that you get used to, you can always save yourself some actions, or you can go ahead and even save curves. If you go in here to save, it's best to, I make a special folder that I just call curves. That's what I would do. You call it curves, and then go in there, and you might give this the name Canyon Greenery. Canyon Greenery. I'm just trying to think of something. And then later on you can come in and load that, and it'll remember that you've created this curves folder, and you can load that Canyon Greenery in and save that curve. Okay, so it's kind of nice to give yourself some basic starting points that you know have worked for you in the past, and then you can tweak from that rather than always starting from the very beginning like I have been doing. Okay, so alright, so let's go ahead and save and to do the next one. Okay, now this one is I had already worked with it some, and this, okay, so I turned off the this is now the before, and you see it's quite a dramatic picture, but it hardly really gives the depth perception feeling of the image. So what do I have here? I have a channel that's not been touched, and a B channel that's been touched radically. Okay, so what's this B channel? What could it possibly be doing? Let's turn it on. Oh, look at that. All it's doing is bringing out the yellows and killing some blue cast. So look at the yellows coming out of that side wall, and the yellow that's in the green. Remember now, the B channel is not the green channel, but most greenery is not really green. Green's a pretty dark color. Most greenery has a lot of yellow in it, and so that's why both channels wind up having an effect on how greenery looks. So this channel is just the blue channel, and yet it's having that effect. So see that it's bringing out this yellow that's in this stone, and the yellow content that's in that, and it's also acting as a blue killer to get rid of the blue haze that's deep in the valley. So that's what that does there. Okay, and so this one, as you can imagine, this one is just to bring out a very subtle amount of magenta. And indeed, so this is a case where I separated the A from the B channel. I did nothing to the B, did nothing to the lightness. I just did the A channel and treated them separately. And the reason I did that was so that I could apply different opacities and dial them back individually after I established what kind of a steepness I was going to lend to the curve, and if I was going to do any color cast removal. All right, so So the A channel is really kind of subtle in that it's an opacity of 80, and I've got the opacity of the yellow, the B channel, turned all the way up. So let's see what would happen if I turned this back up to 100. That's a little bit intense. Yeah, so it's making a little bit too much intensity in this down here in this foreground. So that's why I guess I dialed it down to 80. And again, this is another thing you can use your arrow keys, by the way. Once you click on the opacity key, you can hold your up and down arrow and move it around and dial in exactly what you want to see. All right, so there again, hold the Alt key down and click the eyeball, and there's the before, where you don't see anything of this content down here. This is all blued out. It hardly shows up as anything, and the subtlety of the colors in this rock is just gone, versus here where you're seeing lots of detail suddenly emerge. Look at all the lines that are in here, all the I mean, there's texture in this rock that you just simply do not see without seeing the color contrast. And I've done nothing to the luminosity contrast at all in this picture. This is strictly all done by increasing the color contrast. Okay, so I hope that's starting to get you the idea of how kind of really cool this tool is. Here's another example of a picture that I worked a bit on to try to get some different things, but actually I used the hue saturation for this. This is what does this say? This is in lab, but here's where I used the hue saturation in LAB and two curves. So I did go ahead and bring in more things. This uses a luminosity mask, as you can see, as we discussed in the very first of these shows. And the luminosity mask is being used so that my curve, my hue saturation, not curve, but my hue saturation control only has an effect according to the black here and the white. So so it's cutting back on the amount of effect. And I also, let's see, I forget which. Yes, here's what I did was I pulled back the saturation of the yellows and of the cyans. I actually used the hue saturation as a desaturation tool. Okay, and I even shifted the hue just slightly of my yellows because I wasn't happy with the way the yellows were coming across. So very subtle change. Yeah, I can barely see it, but I know why I did it, because when I did the A and B control, it made the yellow content that was in these trees just way too flashy, and so I pulled it back, and so there, this looks like a lightness channel. Indeed, nothing done to the A and B. See? And this looks like an A and B channel move, which it is. And this actually is just a standard, very straightforward steepness curves that are really common, that I use so much that I actually had these saved, that I often push the A channel by quite a bit more than I push the B channel. And but anyway, so there you have it. That's, again, this is pretty darn subtle in how much it's really affecting the picture, but it's bringing, this is before, the after is making the blues bluer, and the yellows, like I said, the yellows are kind of almost too much back here, but rather than pull that back, like I said, I used the hue saturation, because see, this, without desaturating that, it was definitely too much. So there's another clue. You can use the curves control, the A and B channels, but that doesn't stop you from using the hue saturation things. Just that I've always found that the problems I usually introduce while I'm fixing one thing, the problem I'd be making would be in oversaturating something else. Some portion will be oversaturated. So that's when I go in and I usually desaturate using the hue saturation. But the nice thing to know is that you're using hue saturation and it's actually affecting, it's working in the LAB mode. So you start wrapping your head around how your Photoshop is working for you to make this this image content. Okay, so there's another quick example, and I won't save that. All right, so here's another one we can start from scratch on. So I'll use again, I'll show you once more for anyone that might have come in late. Change mode to LAB color, lab color, and it'll always tell you what mode you're in. And by the way, if you're going to save these for web, it'll be in RGB again, okay? And so you'd have to go up here to save for web and just realize that it's going to save in RGB. It is smart enough to know to do that because you can't have a JPEG in LAB mode. All right, so let's go ahead and change that. Again, we're adding a curves layer. We're not doing anything to lightness. This time we'll start with the B, and we'll just make the B steeper, and I'm not even going to pin it this time because all I'm going to do is steepen it. And as long as I've got this going right through the center, I know I haven't added any color casts. Oh, but look at that, I definitely increased the, made some things a little bit too blue. I've increased the color a little bit too much, right? So this probably had a blue cast in it to begin with. So again, you just move in the direction of yellow, and that removes the blue cast. But if it's only in certain areas that it's blue, like in the distance, and you want to remove some of that distance blue, then you pin it, and that's when you remove some of the effect. And let's get this straight again. There we go. So you remove some of the effect by making the curve less steep in an area. Okay? So I'm making it less steep in the blues. There we go. So now it's a little less steep just in this section. Okay? Moving it towards yellow, making it less steep, less color contrast, just for the grays, the dark grays. Remember, below this line is below 50% gray, above this line is above 50% gray, but the only area that actually has an effect is a very narrow range, because you can't even see these colors down here and these colors up here because the luminosities are so bright, it's unbelievable. It's just beyond the range that we'd be working in. Okay, so this one, there we go. I'll go ahead and overkill a little bit. I'm overkilling on this grass on purpose. So we'll go ahead and do the same thing. Oh, again, let's just see what happens if I just do a fairly steep full quadrant. Move in the reds and yellows. And look at this. You didn't even see this browning in here before. It's just this brown grass didn't even show up as dead grass before, and now it's quite obvious that we have yellow in here and we have brown in there. Might increase the green content, and again magenta this direction, green that direction, and we might fool around with making things more green. Let's see what happens. That's adding an uncomfortable cast to it. I don't want it looking magenta-y. I want it looking green. Okay, there we go. So that looks like kind of a in-between. And again, I can lower the effect in the shadows, or I can increase the effect by pinning nearby. And remember, the effects, here you go. This is showing just how much magenta is in the picture. And then you can take and use your arrow keys on that dot and make it a little more subtle. But that's where what would be in there? What would be making that red, huh? Maybe it's clover, or could be, who knows? A little bit just the so I'm increasing that. There we go. I'm increasing it enough to be overkill. And down here, let's see what we do. So what happens if I make that more steep? Well, that's actually kind of interesting. It seems to be bringing out the green and making that a little less yellow. So, okay. So let's say that's the one I'm going to go with. Now, mind you, I got a bunch of information in here that's really super subtle. And you see how close to the 50% gray, how close to neutral in color this is. Well, actually, when I say 50% gray, in this case, I mean color gray, color neutral gray, where you have, if you were speaking in RGB, where all red, green, and blue were all the same exact number, okay? And so here we're talking where pretty much these are the same numbers, so there is no contrast to even be derived. There's no contrast, no color contrast at this point at all. Whereas there's more color contrast the further away you get from this center point. But at that center point you're talking where there's just no color contrast there to even fool with. So if you were thinking, oh, I'd like to bring out, there's got to be some green in here because it's forestry. Well, not if there's really nothing in there to even work with. You could try putting a dot, if you can get another dot. You could try putting a dot really, really close there and seeing if you can manipulate it. But just to be forewarned that if you did such a thing, you're going to have to put some more dots around. Okay, so there I've made a little steepness that's unique just to that region. That I could, oh, and look at that, it's hard to add dots in here. There we go. Give me a dot. Oh, it's not gonna let me. I gotta add dots further away from each other. Okay, so there you go. I can thwart it, but if I click up, it makes it go away. Okay, so it doesn't let me put dots too close together here. But there I am actually pulling some green out that wasn't even there before. So that's kind of interesting. Still feel like my blue is getting just blasted in here, so I'd like to remove some of that blue. There we go. It's a little too cyanish. Okay, well, we're not going to go too crazy working on this. So now again, I've got something that's got an overkill happening, and I can pull back on the color and on the change. All right, let's say I pull it to about here, and let's do my before and after. And I think that was worth the trouble, because I didn't see any color in this picture at all, and now I actually see some subtle color differences, and it's a better picture for it. Okay. All right, now I've been at this for an hour. If you're getting tired of seeing these changes and all this stuff, sure, drop out. You can always come back later on. But I'm going to go ahead, and I've had 2 more pictures pulled out that I wanted to at least give a quick, give a treatment to. So let's go ahead and pull out the A channel. And this time all I'm going to do is make it steep by a subtle amount. Of course, I gave it a color cast just then, but now I make it so that as long as that line goes through the center, right there, then I'm not giving a color cast, I'm just increasing the color contrast. And it's affected a very tiny amount. I'm going to go ahead and make it even steeper. Here we are. Now we're talking. There, now we're seeing the difference between the green and blue in here has just really jumped out of this picture. It was just about you couldn't even tell. It just was all blending into the kind of grayness of the picture. But with this thing, with a steepness, now we see the redness of the soil and we see some of this green coming out. So let's go ahead and say that we're done on that end. And now we'll use B first to remove a little bit of color of blue. And then I'll go ahead and make this steep. Or I could just say, you could get rid of that. You can also just, when you're making it steep, simply make the line be above the center instead of being neutral. Instead of being in the middle, you make the line so it's not through the middle. Now this one doesn't need that much color contrast change to the A and B channel. And I'm going to just be very subtle about moving this over here. Just want to get some of that bluishness out. Deliberately altering color. I take a look in here, yeah, it's in the middle. So go ahead and there we go. Just a little bit left of center. There we are. And like I say, I can add dots here and increase steepness for the darks and decrease it for the lights and do all kinds of things like that. And as you see now, I've just brought out a bunch of yellow that we didn't even see was in these clouds. Okay, but of course you don't want that to be really obvious. So, and there's a bunch of yellow over in here that was just disappearing from the picture. This channel, I feel like I probably would do this separately, again, because it's making just a little bit of an overkill on the greenery by making it too yellow. But that again, that's one of those decisions you make, is just how much you want to take the blue cast out. And you can work through masks again. I could always paint a mask on there. All right, so there you go. There's before, kind of a gray, before there's kind of a gray look. It's not very interesting, and bingo, now it suddenly has color and majesty and all that kind of stuff. So now another thing you might want to do, of course, is you might want to enhance the blue castness of the picture. You know, it's no reason why you always have to be trying to remove the blue cast. You could be trying to make it more blue to enhance some effect that you're after. But I find that, generally speaking, removing blue cast is a first step, and then go ahead and increase the steepness of these to bring out some quality that you might be looking for through subtle moves in here above and below the thing. Remember, you can have a different amount of contrast in one direction than you have in the other. Okay, so all right, so there you have another example of before and after. So this one we're doing most of our affectations on the greenery down here. All right, so and I didn't even dial this back, it's just straight up. And go ahead and save it for later demos. And this is the final one that we'll be working on. This doesn't need all that much done to it. I'm just going to take the A channel, and that's where I think most of this is going to wind up being of interest. Yeah, make it a little steeper. And there we go. So I've made it, and it's these greens have been made a little bit too cyanish as a result of pushing the magenta channel so hard. So we'll go in here and we'll change some of that by, again, pushing the yellows up a little harder, and not too hard, just a little. Okay, so now I'm seeing green that looks a little bit more pine green. And I think I'll increase this even more and still pull back some of that bluishness. And I'm just working, this is just the most brute force method that you're seeing now. So make this even steeper. Oh my gosh, that's way overkill. Okay, so now I've done this crazy overkill on this thing. You're really seeing amazing amounts of differences here. But again, so let's just go in here and pull back the opacity till we have it to where we want it. And there we have it. Now the cool thing about this, you can do something similar in RGB by switching modes to the color mode. And that does a similar thing in RGB in that it affects just the A and B channels without any luminosity when you're using curves. But and it helps defeat some of the problems of the curves control in RGB, where if you're increasing brightness, you're increasing saturation. So, but this gets rid of having to deal with any of that kind of stuff, and because you're always just working on the color content and nothing but the color content. Okay, so again, and also don't be afraid to go ahead and fool around with different modes, different things, you know, multiply and overlay and stuff like that, and just to see what happens. Your overlay will have a different effect based on the gray content of the picture. But you're really just you're using the modes in that case just to play around with contrast because of the way that works. But I kind of like what that did to the contrast in this picture, and so I'm probably going to leave it that way. So there you have before, kind of grayed out, not a lot of contrast to the subtlety of the greens, and there after with lots of contrast in color, where you can tell where a darker green and a lighter green, a more yellowy green tree is, and where the reds are in this picture, where you really would be hard pressed to find any of that information before without really straining your eyes. So there you have it. Okay, so that's tonight's demo. You got to see how the LAB channel is brought in, how you switch modes. I even showed you how to make an action to switch modes and throw a curve in there right away. And say you wanted to make it throw in a second curve, you just clicked on the most recent thing that you did, hit record, and go ahead, and now you've added another one. And so you could make that be your luminosity channel and this here thing. You could even let's see, what's all this color? A, B, and we'll call this one there we go. So okay, hit stop. And now, so if I let's go ahead and save this. Here we are. So now if I open something up and like this, I purportedly could play this, and let's see what happens. And bingo, now we have an 8B a luminosity already labeled for me, and I'm ready to take off, and this is already switched to LAB mode. I'm already in the luminosity channel. Well, I didn't want to be there. I want to be in my AP. Okay, yeah. So there you have it. And I just can't stop myself. Let's have one more. Very subtle. There we are. Okay, that's all I'm going to do to that one. There we go. Before and after. Ta-da! All right. Thanks a lot for hanging out with me in this show, and I hope that you got quite a lot out of the LAB thing, and are enticed to perhaps buy Dan Margulis' book, The Canyon Conundrum. The Photoshop Lab Color is the actual name of it, and the subtitle is The Canyon Conundrum. And it's just so loaded with information. It goes way beyond anything. I mean, I would need hours and hours and hours of these tutorials to possibly cover all that he does in that book. In there, he includes techniques for major league color color correction issues, for salvaging pictures, like the ones that have gone all magenta and don't seem to have any color content left to them. Well, but believe it or not, with using LAB mode, you can salvage a lot. And also different ways of using masks and of using the content of the A channel to affect how you do the B channel. He has all kinds of things like that in there. So using different very interesting modes that most of us never even encounter. So I can't recommend the book too highly. Very good book, and the links in the event page. And so anyway, so that's it. It's tonight's show, and I'll see you next week. Thanks a lot.